Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
John, let me start with you. After President Trump was elected, these are just some of the headlines that we saw. You see them here on the screen for our viewers on Sirius Satellite Radio. I'll read a few of them. The Trump presidency destroying marriages across the country. PBS post-election stress disorder sweeps the nation. America's therapists are worried about Trump's effect on your mental health. Is this unique to this time in history, John Meacham, or has there always been so much strife around our politics, around our president?
Well, we had a civil war where we killed each other over existential questions of liberty and freedom. Families divided, patriot versus Tory during the Revolution. Arthur Schlesinger used to say that the battles over intervention and isolationism in the late 1930s into 40 and 41 were more ferocious in intimate settings than even the battles over Vietnam. But just because something's happened before doesn't mean it's not happening now. And I have a theory about this. There's been a little bit of scholarship on it, that to some extent what's happening is, as particularly mainline Protestantism begins to fade from the center of the country, to some extent political strife and political loyalties have replaced religious belief and religious practice. And when you think about it, you have your own denomination, you nominally assent to the fact that you're part of a larger community, but by and large, you worship in your pew, you read your texts, you listen to your preachers. And I think that because we have a social cohesion now built on our social contract that is much more about conflict than cohesion, it's going to be a tough holiday for a lot of folks.
Are you saying that our politics has replaced our faith?
I think there's an interesting argument to be explored that there is a natural human impulse to seek meaning and order and community, and that more often than not at the moment, people are seeking meaning, order, and community in political tribalism as opposed to traditional religious communities and affiliations.
You bought that?
It's such a smart thesis, and I think it's a very intriguing one. I think there's an added dimension with Trump, which is that what divides us about Trump isn't simply a question of policy, although there is obviously that. It's also a perception of values and the place that values ought to play in our lives. I mean, it's very difficult for someone like me who has young children, a couple of teenagers, someone younger, to explain that a man whose behavior is like that of the president should occupy that kind of position. I mean, I used to have problems with some of Obama's policies. I disagreed with the Iran deal, one thing or another. But I never had trouble respecting Obama as a man or thinking of him as a really fitting symbol for the country, in the idea of the president occupying not just the position of head of government, but head of state, almost analogous to Queen Elizabeth in England. So my differences with whether it was President Obama or President Clinton, were always essentially policy differences.
Right.
Actually, President Clinton was a little different because there it became a question of moral values. With President Trump, the real issue, and I think why it's so divisive, is a lot of people are saying, how can you support a guy with these views about minorities, these views about women, these views about his position in society, these views about the truth? These go to the sort of questions that religious institutions used to address, and perhaps John is right, no longer do. Of course, the great surprise is that so many people who identify as being religious conservative Christians find themselves supporting a president whose behavior is so at variance with what they espouse.
One of the things that I continue to find fascinating in this current age in which we found ourselves, politically especially, there was a time where you could have a conversation around a table with people who came from various political leanings, but the conversation themselves were rooted in some semblance of fact. I find now that you can be talking to people who, again, conservative, liberal, whatever have you, they don't even care about the facts.
No.
There's no concern about facts. This fact checker, Brett, your paper today published this handy guide. It's very fascinating. I saw it and I thought this actually may be useful. Not to say that other things in the New York Times aren't especially useful. You get my point. But this is the hot button issues to avoid list according to the New York Times. The midterm election results, the migrant caravan, healthcare, the Kavanaugh fight, the economy. Pretty much anything that's happened in this country over the past 6 months, you should avoid talking about at your Thanksgiving table. By the way, I would encourage all of you watching, listening to print that out. Brett, the conversation around your table during the holidays, do you talk politics? Is this something that comes up at all?
Yeah, sure, but we all agree, so it's a lot easier. We're all on the same side of these questions, so I think it's a matter of your emphasis on disgust until finally one of the kids says, okay, we're bored with politics, let's talk about something else. And I find it's one of the things that I've been trying to do, just on a personal level, is separate my disgust with the president, his policies, and his behavior with my view about his supporters, because I have too many friends who pulled the lever for President Trump. I know that they are good and decent and moral people, and I don't want to judge them morally simply on account of their political preferences. But that takes an effort on my part, and I'm trying to be more conscious about it.
John Meacham, Thanksgiving table there. Do you guys talk politics, or do you just talk sports?
Well, we talk about John Tyler, so we try to do as many 19th century presidents as possible. I hope they're not watching. Well, it's MSNBC, so they're not. My in-laws in Mississippi actually have only been impressed with me when occasionally I'm attacked on Fox, because that's the only time I cross their radar screen. So no, honestly. Although I had this seems to be a support group about our families. I had a lunch yesterday with an in-law where 20 of the 25 minutes or so was about politics, and it goes exactly, Craig, to what you just said. We just didn't begin with the same assumptions. And so I would play in 1890 it was XYZ, and it's a useful diversion because then they wander off. But I think it's particularly it's an interesting microcosm, right? Because, and Brett writes about this a lot. My sense is if we don't find a way to reinstate and honor the role of reason and of being able to take account of changing circumstances and shifting data to change our views on things of public value, then we're not being true to what I think of as the true original intent of the revolution, which is very grand to say, but it has the virtue of being true. When Jefferson wrote that all men were created equal, he did it not because he was just a rising young politician of Virginia, but because he had been in this transatlantic conversation, including the scientific revolution and the European Enlightenment and the Reformations and the translation of sacred scripture into the vernacular, Gutenberg, rise of the bourgeoisie, this entire shift of the world to being one in which reason could lead us past just reflexive obedience to authority, whether it was a pope or a king. And that's the insight on which the Republic was founded. And if we don't think when people say something, and we don't think that maybe they're right. Now, 99 times out of 100, they're probably, you're going to disagree. But I've been thinking a lot about this.
Yeah.
I think we need to find a way to get to a kind of patriotic partisanship, because partisanship is fine. That's the oxygen of government, but it's of a free society. But it is this reflexive partisanship. And what Brett just said, I think, is so important, is you can't paint with a brush. You can't take the president's behavior and attribute it to all of his supporters. At the same time, his supporters have to have an honest accounting of what they're supporting.
It is Friday, the 23rd of November of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, folks, because we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life, especially after that big meal yesterday, huh? Oh my gosh, we needed to have a nightcap after that one if you were awake. And let me put the lie to this myth about turkey having all this tryptophan that puts people to sleep. Actually, a regular chicken has much more tryptophan than a turkey. So, just there you go. The power of suggestion, folks. In fact, you might even say that the whole of Thanksgiving is nothing but the power of suggestion. Marketing suggestion. And here we are, but it does bring us together. And we had actually at our little family gathering, it went really well. My Trump bro, as is his wont, came in. Of course, he's always late because he has to make the entrance. He is in the movies, so he ought to know. Of course, wait a second. So was I one time. Nonetheless, he did come in and announce, "This is the rule. No talking about politics or family drama." And I'm thinking, what? That's family drama right there. But it went unnoticed, and I didn't comment on it. And we had a really nice meal. Really nice. Of course, we talked a little bit about sports. And a lot about, a new love interest that my younger brother has now. And good for him. So, how did your family Thanksgiving dinners go? I hope it was lovely and sedate and embracing. Because today is the day that people get to go out and beat the crap out of each other for material gain. Okay, I got to have that sale. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to have that sale because I'm staying inside. I've been doing this for a long time, even before they called it Black Friday. Well, of course, this is the America that we all know and love. A lot of news yesterday. Trump, I don't know. Is he really the president of the United States? This guy is completely unprepared, has none of the qualities that one would expect. And I don't know how this guy gets away with it. Oh, that's right. It was a small family business with really about, a dozen, maybe 24 people all told in the whole company. You can get away with a lot that way. Other news out. Oh, well, of course, Trump. Back to Trump again. Called the troops from Mar-a-Lago. Gilded Mar-a-Lago. What a sacrifice he had to make. He could not even spend time at the local Coast Guard facility nearby. Didn't hand out, didn't dish up any food for any of the troops like most presidents have done since before Eisenhower, I think. And phoned it in. Trump phoned it in, talked to the troops, and then tried to engage them in wholly inappropriate discussions of politics. The military is not supposed to be discussing these things. And you know what's even worse? We're not even talking about engaging commanders on ships about trade. We're not talking about discussing the border. We could discuss the fact that the President of the United States, and I use that term very lightly. In fact, the Netroots Radio Style Manual precludes me from even using the P word, but we're just going to have a capital P president, overarching idea. This president divulged military secrets. As I've said before, the people who voted for him look at him as being a great mind, which says everything you need to know about their minds. Indeed. What's on the rest of the menu here? Black Friday. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Bistro Cafe. Well, thousands of Cuban doctors are abandoning Brazil after attacks by the new far-right president, leaving millions of Brazilians without medical care. And he's doubling down. Spain threatens to veto the Brexit deal over Gibraltar. And the head of the Russian spy agency accused of the British poison attack conveniently dies in an eerily similar fashion as all of the other convenient deaths. After the break, we move to the chef's table where NASA counts down to the landing of the first Martian quake-sensor this Monday, and the last survivor of the 1921 Tulsa Race Riot and the first black woman to join the Coast Guard dies at age 103. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com is the chat room link on the rightish of the page. Kelly Lincoln monitors that, and what a fine monitoring job she does. She's very busy because she has to pay her bills too, you know. And but please do check out her shows on Saturday. At the Table with Kelly Lincoln begins at 3 p.m. on the West Coast. That would be 6 p.m. on the East Coast. And then a few hours later, she teams up with Ricky May for the Roundtable Around House Power Hour at 9 p.m. on the West Coast, midnight on the East Coast. If you would then take a gander, yes, I do use that kind of language here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. If you would now take a gander to the leftish of the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice the contribute button, and I guess we'll be in a fund drive mode for the rest of the holidays. And I don't know why it would be the holidays, because everybody's got their money really tied up for the holidays, but I'm making this in treaty, and we are unable to do any of this without you. And if you could become a Patreon, a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, that would be grand. Even a small recurring donation goes a long way here. And I've mentioned this week that I've been getting the bills, and everything's going up. Our server costs are going up because, to be honest, we're need more bandwidth because we got some people listening. Okay, and what else? Oh, just regular internet costs. My ISP decided that, we got to charge you more too. So, and they are. And so your contribution keeps this endeavor of resisting as it was meant to be. So thank you so much for that. Follow the show on Twitter. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that platform. We're really, really, really pissed off at Zuckerberg and Sandberg. Come on. But we are over at Facebook, such as it is, so check us out over there. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I do post a show notes and links diary on Daily Co's, and that posts about 10 minutes before showtime. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. Well, I don't know, we're over at Facebook too, so oh well. And pick up podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy by way of Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, YouTube, iHeart, iTunes, and all sorts of other places too. Okay, first article up here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of Raw Story. And, of course, Raw Story takes a little while to load because you have to turn off your ad blocker to be able to access them. And then they take all this time to load because, well, they've got so many advertisements and so many banners and sidebars to load to, suggest that you do something, well, you may not have thought of yourself. So Anthony Broddle of Reuters wrote this article, and I'm getting it by way of Raw Story now. I went to Reuters, but for some reason I wasn't able to locate this. So I'm getting it from here. And Raw Story such as it is. Now, the first of thousands of Cuban doctors left Brazil yesterday after criticism by Brazil's far-right president-elect prompted Cuba's government to sever a cooperation agreement, leaving millions of Brazilians without medical care. Bolsonaro said the Cuban doctors were being used as slave labor because the Cuban government took 75% of their salaries. He said the program that began in 2013 could only continue if they got full pay and were allowed to bring their families from Cuba. Bolsonaro, an admirer of Donald Trump, was elected last month by Brazilians fed up with rising crime and rampant corruption that reached new heights during almost a decade and a half of leftist governments with close ties to Cuba. I should add that some of these corruption charges were trumped up, no pun intended, trumped up charges. And the woman president, the lady president, they treated her like Hillary and locked her up. With the chance of lock her up, by the way. Now, the Cuban doctors practiced mostly in poor and remote areas of Brazil where Brazilian doctors do not want to work. Wow, that sounds just like America. Who wants to work in poor rural areas of America? Everybody wants to be a specialist to make the big bucks. Who wants to do family practice in a poor area? That means you have to work. The government is now scrambling to replace them in almost 8,500 positions left vacant by the sudden departure of the Cubans. Cuba has a respected health service and generates major export earnings by sending more than 50,000 healthcare workers to more than 60 countries, even receiving a fraction of their salaries. The money was good for the doctors by Cuban standards. As they lined up to check in at the Brasilia airport, many had large, mainly 49-inch smart TVs packaged to take home to communist-run Cuba, where such imported sets are very expensive. I'd take 3 or 4 and maybe sell them on the black market. Well, of course, that's why I probably would get thrown in a gulag there now, wouldn't I? Okay, in many Brazilian towns and outskirts of cities that relied on the Cuban doctors, usually crowded waiting rooms at public health posts were empty this week, and notices said appointments had been canceled until further notice. Adriela Rodriguez, a pregnant 22-year-old, was turned away on Wednesday when she went for a prenatal scan at Santa Maria, a town near the capital, Brasilia. We were so worried because we don't have the money to pay for a private doctor, and she is 5 months pregnant and still needs to be monitored and have tests, said her mother, Adriana. A national lobby of mayors, the FNP, and the Municipal Health Authorities Council, CONASEMS, said in a statement that 29 million Brazilians could be left without basic health care. They urged the government to make it possible for the Cubans to stay. Now, of course, Bolsonaro doesn't take office until January 1st, but apparently his word carries a lot of weight, even now. He said he would seek to grant asylum to any Cubans who ask for it, thereby escalating tensions with Havana. He said Cuban doctors were not qualified and would have to take exams to practice in Brazil. Actually, they're more than qualified. And maybe the Cuban or the Brazilian doctors are the ones that really need to be tested to see if they can practice in Brazil. Regardless, the health ministry plans next week to waive a requirement that Cubans validate their medical diploma in Brazil so they can continue working directly, contracted by the Brazilian government and not through the Pan American Health Organization. It's not clear how many Cubans will want to break with their communist-run government's Doctors for Export program, which is present in about 60 countries, especially if they have children in Cuba, since it would be tantamount to defecting. Now, Brazil plans to fill the medical vacuum with local hires. In just 2 days since registration opened, about 3,700 Brazilians have been selected to fill the empty posts. But those replacements are mainly in large urban areas where they can make more money. Gabriela Bazinska of Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. European Union negotiators meet today to try to clear the last hurdle before a Sunday summit is due to endorse the Brexit deal. But Spain's 11th hour objections over Gibraltar mean the final text might not be ready until the last minute. 4 months before Britain leaves the EU, the legal divorce treaty and an accompanying political declaration on the two sides' future ties are ready to be rubber-stamped by Theresa May and the leaders of the 27 union states staying together after Brexit. Spain has asked for changes to the withdrawal treaty and the declaration on a new EU-UK relationship to make clear any decisions about the disputed British overseas territory of Gibraltar would only be taken in direct talks with Madrid. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said yesterday that Spain will veto the draft deal on Britain's exit from the EU if there are no changes made. After my conversation with Theresa May, our positions remain far away. My government will always defend the interests of Spain if there are no changes. We will veto Brexit, Sanchez said in a tweet. I guess those are official statements now, in a tweet. What is the future going to hold us to account over that? Under EU rules, the withdrawal treaty is adopted by qualified majority and not unanimity, so a single state cannot block it. EU leaders, however, seek unity on this most politically sensitive matter. The Brexit deal covers financial settlement, expatriates' rights, and the sensitive Irish border, as well as setting a blueprint for future trade and security ties. It must also be backed by the European Parliament to come into force next year. Kova and Andrew Osborne of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. And we will be going a little bit over on our break because, well, it is a holiday and a lot of people are taking the holiday off. So we got to fill the time, and we will. The head of Russia's military intelligence agency that the West has blamed for a string of brazen attacks died conveniently, in this reporter's opinion, on Wednesday after a, quote, serious and long illness, end quote, the Russian Defense Ministry said yesterday, hailing him as a true son of Russia. The Ministry of Defense heaped praise on Colonel General Igor Korobov, age 62, not that old, okay, let's be clear, who had run the spy agency, best known as the GRU, since 2016, saying he had been made a hero of Russia for his service in the post. And that is the highest state award that one can receive. The loving memory of this wonderful person, a true son of Russia, a patriot of the fatherland, Colonel General Igor Valentinovich Korobov, will always be in our hearts, the ministry said in a statement. Defense Ministry Sergei Shoigu, a close ally of Putin, expressed his condolences to Korobov's relatives. Oh, yes, they always like to bring the relatives in. Shake their hands, give them some condolences, put it on national TV. So everybody knows, be careful. This could happen to you. Britain has accused the GRU of attempting to poison former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter with a nerve agent. And the Netherlands has accused it of trying to hack the global chemical weapons watchdog. And U.S. intelligence agencies say it tried to hack the 2016 presidential election. And Russia denies all those allegations, and Trump doesn't believe any of our intelligence or any of our allies' intelligence, but he'll believe Vlad, because Vlad was very, very firm. He was strong in his denial. Oh, God, it was so cute. Speculation about Korobov's fate had been growing since an unconfirmed media report that Putin had summoned him after the Skripal affair and severely criticized the operation, which left the Skripals alive and the GRU a target of mockery in Western media. Yeah, the mission failed, and you know what happens when the mission fails with Vlad? Like it happens with any mob. Now, Korobov was absent from a ceremony in Moscow this month where Putin and other senior officials celebrated the centenary of the GRU, and the Russian leader praising its skill and unique abilities. Korobov's death paves the way for Putin to appoint a successor to head an agency that intelligence experts say has stepped up its covert missions as tensions mount between Russia and the West, which has imposed sanctions on Moscow after its annexation of the Ukraine's Crimea. Asked last month if there would be a shakeup at the Defense Ministry in the aftermath of the Skripal affair, the Kremlin said the low quality of the allegations level the GRU did not justify such changes, which translates actually as, don't worry, someone's head is going to roll one way or the other. Korobov was a Soviet military veteran who served in the Air Force and, according to his official biography, began working for the GRU in 1985. The GRU, founded as the Registration Directorate in 1918 after the Bolshevik Revolution, is one of Russia's three main intelligence agencies, alongside the domestic Federal Security Service and the SVR Foreign Intelligence Service. The last head of the GRU, Igor Shurgin, also died at a relatively young age, conveniently. He was just 58 when the Kremlin said in 2016 he had died unexpectedly, yet very conveniently. All right, let's go to our break, and when we come back, Yes, there's weather, and there's weather from around the world. And we will finish up with those stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, no apology needed. For an actress best known for her work in raunchy comedies, it's strange to see Melissa McCarthy play the role of a sour, inebriated, crazy cat lady type in Can You Ever Forgive Me? In a role completely devoid of glamour or ego, McCarthy plays the real-life writer Lee Israel, who prior to 1991 had achieved a degree of success for her well-written and researched biographies. But by the time we meet her in the film, however, these glory days are over. Desperate to pay the rent, Lee discovers that she can put her writing talent to use embellishing, or in some cases inventing letters by deceased luminaries, including Dorothy Parker and Noel Coward. In other words, Lee finds a new career as a forger, and she's so good at it that she manages to convince many so-called experts that her creations are real. While this extra-legal career changes her financial situation, it does little to change a personal life that is quite empty, with the exception of fellow writer, drinking buddy, and eventual accomplice Jack Hawk, who's played by a charming Richard E. Grant. While Jack is openly gay, Lee is mostly closeted, and even the promise of a potential relationship with a shy female bookstore owner who is a fan ends due to Lee's awkwardness and inability to allow people to become close. There are laughs here, but the movie is very much a drama about isolation and human connection. Lee is only able to connect and show warmth in her writing when pretending to be somebody else. Can You Ever Forgive Me also functions as a look at the weird world of literary fans and collectors and the self-appointed experts who deal in the detritus of celebrity. While Lee's creations may have been fakes, there's nothing but authenticity in McCarthy's performance here. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
Imagine if retailers held a nationwide super spectacular sales day and no one came. I don't mean customers, but that sales staff, cashiers, and even managers wouldn't show up to open the doors for the usual sale-mania frenzy of mass, crass, crazy consumerism. But that's silly, of course, even slightly un-American to think that stores wouldn't open to cash in on a hugely promoted retail bonanza. Yet there it is. REI, the national purveyor of outdoor gear and sporting goods, says it will no longer participate in the shopping spectacle called Black Friday, the day of nonstop doorbuster sales that now overwhelms Thanksgiving. This holiday is meant to be a calm, family-oriented time to get away from all the hubbub of life and reflect on our blessings. But in recent years, such national chains as Macy's and Walmart have led a corporate assault on Thanksgiving with a buy blitz of consumer come-ons. Rush to the mall, shout the barrage of Black Friday ads, enticing us to reduce our values to the shallow concept of monetary value, i.e. lower-priced stuff. They've turned this contemplated day of thanks into a weekend of worshiping mammon. Enough, says REI, the retail co-op with 143 stores and $2.2 billion a year in sales is raising the ethical bar by canceling its participation in Black Friday. Instead of shopping on the Thursday and Friday of Thanksgiving weekend, REI is urging its employees and customers to break out, literally. Take a walk with family and friends, enjoy a bike ride, visit a public park, and otherwise get outside the soul-suffocating syndrome of constant consumerism. This is Jim Hightower saying, what a concept. Don't shop, live. Connect with people, nature, the spirits, and yourself. For more information, go to optoutside.rei.com.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the Lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the Lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
I'm Mark Boulanger. A parliamentary committee in the UK studying the fashion industry has been told that problems must be addressed at the country level where the clothes are being produced. Jenny Holdcroft, an Assistant General Secretary of Industrial, told the committee that the companies must work with the global unions and the unions in the countries. Industrial is the global union which represents garment workers. Ms. Holdcroft was asked how easily consumers could tell if companies respect freedom of association, the right to join a labor union.
Many companies will say that they're doing all of these things, and this is a sort of the danger of reporting, and like they'll give themselves a big tick, but the question is for the consumer and for any of us to understand what are they actually really doing. Now, every company will tell you that freedom of association is respected in their supply chains because they are sourcing from countries that have ratified the ILO Convention on Freedom of Association, therefore everything's okay. Of course, the reality is very different from that. So it's fair to say, yes, we're sourcing from countries that on paper have legislation. It's not ideal, but it's, most of it is not that bad. It's the enforcement of that legislation, and this is where companies have a strong role to play. So the measure for us is to what extent are the companies working with us to solve these issues directly concerning workers, because the workers are our members, or should be if they only had an opportunity to join a trade union, which they don't. So we measure companies on the basis of are they prepared to actually sit down and talk to us about how they need to be working with their suppliers to ensure that the suppliers are not using the laws to abuse the situation. I mean, the unions, when they try to organise, they face every kind of hostility from employers. They get sacked, they get arrested, they get beaten up, they get killed in some circumstances. It's a huge, huge challenge. What we need companies to do is to send a message to their suppliers that this is unacceptable. And if you want to do business with us, you've got to stop these practices. So we have a number of ways that we engage with companies. We have our gold standard, if you like, is we have global framework agreements with individual companies. We only have one with a UK company, which is ASOS, and that's a fairly recent one. And we're working with them. I mean, our goal is to work directly with the companies in the supplier countries, with the factories that they're sourcing from, to say to those factories, you have to allow workers to have access to a trade union. And that means allowing them to actually have contact with them, and if they choose to organise, allowing them to do that. And that sounds very simple, but it is incredibly rare. The norm is to resist that unionisation effort. So, of course, that means that the workers themselves have no means of influencing their wages, their working hours, etc., etc. The other thing that I would measure companies on is what are they doing about the way that they do business with their suppliers. Yes, we know about the living wage, how important that is, but it's unrealistic to say to a company, we expect you to be paying a living wage, because that's too many steps down the chain removed from their business. What we want to know is what are they paying to the factories? And I think this is something that requires a lot more scrutiny. We're working with a group of companies at the moment to open up their purchasing practices. It's incredibly complicated. How do you price a piece of clothing? How do you decide what is fabric, what is overheads, what is the price that actually goes to workers, what about indirect workers who aren't directly sewing but might be mopping the floors? It's incredibly complicated, but this is the thing that determines the outcome for the workers. And it's also linked to this high volume thing, because if the workers were paid properly, they could be still getting a decent wage, not producing quite the same volume of clothing. You would have better quality clothes that are fewer but guarantee wages. So it all comes down to what is the business relationship between the company and the factories that it's sourcing from. And I don't know to what extent there could be greater scrutiny of that. It is very complex, but we're starting to learn what the different factors are that go into a price. We're doing that with the companies so that we can then make them make commitments around that which enable us to negotiate with the factories to get better wages.
And that's it international labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, we are all night hawks in the diner of life. Let's begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 42 degrees Fahrenheit, and it even feels like 42. Doesn't feel like 48, doesn't feel like 38, feels like 42. And winds are out of the east-northeast currently at about 2 miles per hour, and they will shift out of the northeast. Shifting out of the northeast and then to the west in just a few hours at 10 to 15 miles per hour. So right now it's east-northeast and it's moving up, coming out of the north-northeast and then shifting straight from the west. We are slated to be a tad warmer today. We were in the mid-50s yesterday, and we're going to be in the mid-50s today, but maybe a notch or two lower than the mid-50s. It is currently raining right now. When I say rain, I mean rain. Not a sprinkle. Of course, what we call rain, I'll remind folks, everywhere else in America except Oregon, this would be considered a torrential downpour. Well, a torrential downpour is when we start having showers. Okay, just so you know. Right now it's rain, but it's pretty good. We're expected today, just during the day, to get close to another quarter inch. And then tonight, we are expected to get about almost a quarter inch as well. Overnight lows look like they're going to be a little low. Overnight low tonight will be at 38. And then the winds will then shift out of the west-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour, a pretty good clip. And we are expected to have rain tomorrow with winds light and variable, partly cloudy. Currently, no pollen. It's been washed from the sky. The air quality index is good at 20, and that daytime UV index is appropriately late fall, low of 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.78 inches. Visibility is down to 2.5 miles, and relative humidity is at 96%. Okay, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 46 and cloudy. Paris is 41 and cloudy. Rome, Italy is 61 degrees Fahrenheit and fair with a active weather watch for disruptions due to thunderstorms and other electric activity that will possibly disrupt, yes, not just electrical infrastructure, but others as well. My gosh. Okay. Kiev is 26 and cloudy. Kabul is 44 with smoke, and that's because everybody's trying to stay warm. Hong Kong is 65 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 48 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 61 degrees with rain, a rain shower and wind. My gosh. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees with rain, and they have an active weather watch right now of, well, heavy winds, small craft advisory. So if you're out on the bay, do take care. And they have a lot of rain coming down too, which is good because at least in Northern California, these rains have put out the campfire. And now, hopefully, there won't be a lot of mudslides. And New York, New York is a chilly 25 degrees Fahrenheit, but sunny and bright. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Worker bees at the Agence France Presse brings us this first offering here at the chef's table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Oh, did I mention the French 77s are all virtually mixed and poured for your imbibing pleasure? So please do. NASA is counting down to a nail-biting touchdown on Monday of the $993 million Mars InSight, the first spacecraft to listen for quakes and study the inner workings of another rocky planet. No one is on board the spacecraft, which launched nearly 7 months ago and has traveled some 300 million miles. But part of its mission is to inform efforts to one day send human explorers to the red planet, which NASA hopes to do by the 2030s. Wow, I guess they figure they're going to have mitigation to all that radiation. Let's hope so. The lander is the first to reach Mars since 2012, when NASA's Curiosity rover touched down to scour the surface and analyze rocks for sign that life forms may once have inhabited Earth's neighbor, now a frigid and dry planet. InSight must survive tense entry into Mars' atmosphere, traveling at a speed of 12,300 miles per hour and swiftly slowing to just 5 miles per hour. Ouch. This entry, descent, and landing phase begins at 11:47 a.m. Pacific time and is only half-jokingly referred to at NASA as 6.5 minutes of terror. Of 43 missions launched towards Mars, only 18 have made it intact, a success rate of around 40%. All those that made it came from the U.S. Going to Mars is really hard, said Thomas Zerbruchin, Associate Administrator for the NASA Science Mission Directorate. The exciting part is we are building on the success of the best team that has ever landed on this planet, which is the NASA team, and its contractors and its collaborators. Hoo-yah! I added the hoo-yah. The name InSight is derived from interior exploration using seismic investigations, geodesy, and heat transport. InSight sounds so much better now, doesn't it? The spacecraft itself stands about waist high, or 3.5 feet, and once its solar arrays are deployed, they will span 20 feet. Fully furled, InSight weighs more than 800 pounds, about the same as a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Well, why didn't you say a Moto Guzzi? What's up with that? Its central instrument is a quake-sensing Its central instrument is a quake-sensing seismometer that was made by the French space agency CNES. This is the only NASA mission until now which is conceived around a foreign-made instrument. Jean-Yves Le Gall, president of CNES, told AFP. So it's a mission that is fundamentally for the United States, for France, and for improving our understanding of Mars. The 6 quake sensors on board are so sensitive they should reveal the smallest tremors on Mars, such as the faint pull of its moon Phobos, impacts from meteors, and possible evidence of volcanic activity. Seismology has taught humanity much about the formation of Earth some 4.5 billion years ago, but much of the Earth-based evidence has been lost to the recycling of the crust, driven by plate tectonics. Plate tectonics doesn't exist on Mars. The spacecraft also has a self-hammering probe that can burrow as deep as 10 to 16 feet, offering the first precise measurement of below ground temperatures on Mars and how much heat escapes from its interior. If it's a self-hammering probe, isn't it hammering itself? No! I know what they mean, though. Now, NASA should know within minutes if the landing went well or not, but we'll have to wait for more than 5 hours for confirmation of the solar array deployment due to the orbit pattern of the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and Mars Odyssey, which can communicate InSight status back to Earth. The first confirming ping at 2004 GMT Monday is eagerly awaited by the crew at Mission Control at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I do have a lot of sweat, blood, and tears invested in this, and I am looking forward to a nice, safe touchdown on Monday, said Stu Spath, InSight Program Manager at Lockheed Martin.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Noor Al-Sabai of Raw Story brings us this final offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The last known survivor of the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921 and the first black woman to enlist in the Coast Guard died at the age of 103 on Thanksgiving evening. Tulsa's KFOR reported that Dr. Olivia Hooker was just 6 years old when her entire neighborhood was decimated in the chaos of the riot, sometimes referred to as the Tulsa Pogrom. White Tulsans ostensibly began slaughtering black residents and burning buildings in the city's Greenwood Black Wall Street district when a black man was accused of assaulting a white woman. How many times have we heard that before? Hundreds of people were killed in the massacre and more than 800 were injured. Hooker's mother, NPR reported earlier in 2018, hid her and her siblings under a table while white men trounced through their backyard with torches. Her family left Oklahoma after the riots and moved to Columbus, Ohio, and she later attended the Ohio State University, where she advocated for female admittance to the Navy. The American Psychological Association noted of the pioneering psychologist. Ooh. She joined the Coast Guard in 1945. The Department of Defense noted in a 2013 profile and was one of 5 black women in her class. Hooker later became a renowned psychologist and civil rights activist and worked to create the Tulsa Race Riot Commission in 1997, which KFOR noted was a project that investigated the riots and advocated for reparations. For decades, Oklahoma schools did not talk about it. Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, told KFOR, in fact, newspapers didn't even print any information about the Tulsa Race Riot. It was completely ignored. It was one of those horrible events that everyone wanted to just sweep under the rug and ignore. Family and friends told the station that Hooker is to be buried in New York. Rest in peace, Grand Lady. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and for the week. But we'll be back here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. Netroots Radio will broadcast on with some holiday programming, as I noticed that some people are taking a holiday. But it will broadcast on 24/7 with all the breaking news as it breaks. So do stay tuned, and we will visit with you right here on Monday in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.